with another really great session. And for the first time today, you will find a poll in the polling tab of the event. So please go from the main area, go to the polls tab, complete that poll for us, and there'll be a specific call out to that in the presentation as well. But I'm not going to take up too much time. Just one thing: we have run into a slight technical issue where some slides may not play audio. Sort of where it's relevant, we'll kind of handle it as it comes up. But beyond that, I'm going to shut up and get out of the way. Over to you.
Hey, Tom, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm just going to share my screen and we can jump straight into this. So everybody let me know that you can see my screen correctly. Super. Okay, everyone. As I said, it's great to be here today. My name is Emmett Cullinane, and for those of you actually in the chat, you might pop in. Have any of you ever seen the Lego movie? The Lego movie? If you have, can you let me know the name of that character, the main guy in the Lego movie? I give that another few seconds. So the main character in the Lego movie, who you see on the screen there, does anyone know what his name is? Okay, someone said yes. Someone said yes in relation to probably seen. Excellent. Kira, that's bonus points for Kira. That's fantastic. So guys, the main character in the Lego movie, his name is Emmett Cullinane. So the reason I have him here is my kids love that film. It's one of their favorite films they've ever seen. His name is Emmett Cullinane, and it's the only film my kids have ever seen where the main character's name is also Emmett. So therefore I have no choice but to use him today as my avatar. And look, he looks happy, he looks smiley, he's often drinking coffee, and he's usually in good form. So there's multiple reasons. So today, guys, what I'm going to bring you through is the principles to help you design better learning. A very, very, very quick introduction background. My own name, as I said, is Emmett Cullinane. If you want more information about me, you can go on to the LinkedIn profile that Tom has already shared on the IDTX website. But very, very briefly, I've been in learning and learning design and training and content delivery for many years now, across many different industries, different technologies, higher education industries, and now back in the industry again. So something I'm very passionate about, something I'm really into. It's what I do. It's what I love to do. It's what I love to talk about. When I'm not loving talking about learning and learning design, I love running and spending time with the kids. So today, what we're going to look at, guys, is to help you design better learning. So I know Tom had a poll set up, so maybe Tom might be able to share the results. So the poll that Tom set up was different names. Are you familiar with different names? So we had three choices. We had Richard E. Mayer, we had Richard E. Grant, and we had John Mayer. And then the final option was, who are you talking about, Emmett? So maybe, Tom, you can share the results of the poll with me.
Yeah, sure. So Richard E. Grant is celebrating on 25.9% of the vote.
Super.
John Mayer on 40.7%.
Go, John.
Who now? Oh, they're changing as we go. Look, everyone suddenly rediscovered the poll. Who now at 21.4%? Yes. Richard E. Grant climbing to 27.6%. This has now become a commentator job. This is very different. And Richard E. Mayer on just 13.8% of the vote.
Super. What you might do, Tom, if you get a chance, is just take a screen grab of that just to save it, and you might share it with me afterwards. So we have who now. We have from the top down, it's Richard. It's John Mayer, Richard E. Grant, who now, and Richard Mayer. Is that correct?
The actual order is Richard E. Grant, Richard Mayer, John Mayer, and who now? Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's great, guys. So yeah, there's no right or wrong in that. I just wanted to know how people were familiar with those different names. So that is fantastic. So thanks for that. So before we jump into the things, I want to share a couple of things with you. One, this is a very high level, very, very, very high level look at the three pedagogical schools. Then I'm going to bring you through how important data is, and then I'm going to bring you through a little story that you might be familiar with And then finally, I'm going to bring you through the principles themselves. So hopefully everyone is still with me. So there are three main pedagogical schools. When I got involved in this whole industry, I remember the very first time I saw this word, I couldn't pronounce it. It was because of the double G. Is it pedagogy, goggy, or is it pedagogy? There's a J. So the second G is actually with a J. So it's pedagogy. Pedagogy is the science and theory and practice of learning. So the literature on this is vast. As I said, this is going to be a very, very overly simplified, deliberately overly simplified look at the three main schools. So you could, if you wish, spend years of your life looking at the different literature. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of articles and journals and books written in this whole area and field. And it's fascinating and it's amazing. But I'm just going to give you a very quick flavor of the three differences. So first up we have is behaviorism. So what behaviorists looked at and what they believe is that the mind is a blank box. So the teacher literally has all the information and the teacher fills the student's mind with information. So stuff gets poured into the student. So the teacher has all the information, the stuff is a blank, the student, the learner is a blank box, they're an empty vessel and the information gets poured in. They also saw learning as being very formulaic and very proceduralized and very linear. So it's literally step by step by step. You do this, followed by this, followed by this, followed by this, and therefore that's the outcome. Very much condition-based, very much this is what you learn, this is how you learn, rote-based learning, and then we have an exam next week. You follow this step by step by step. Some of the big names in this area will be Pavlov and Skinner and Watson. Moving then quickly on to the next one called cognitivism. Now, cognitivism could not be any more different from behaviorism. It's completely and totally and utterly different from behaviorism. And the leading experts at the time and the leading experts in this field, what they looked at and what they concerned themselves about and what they really focused on is the brain or the mind. It's the opposite of behaviorism. So cognitivists, what they looked at was how does all the stuff out there in the world get in here into your brain, into your cognition? How does it get in there? How does all the stuff, so the stuff happening around you all day, every day, if you look at the window, you see different things, but how do some things get into your mind and some things don't? So how does that happen? So they looked at stuff like the sensory store, they looked at things like short-term memory, and they looked at things like long-term memory. So that's what cognition is. Cognition is the mental action or process of adding knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. So there's some amazing tests and research and analysis done on this, a lot actually in the 60s and a lot in American universities. So there's two I'm really interested in. One is, if you in your own time look up a guy called George Sperling, Sperling, and he did a test called the ICONIC, ICONIC, ICONIC memory test. And then the other is George Miller with Miller's Law. So cognitivism is all about how does the brain work? How does the mind work? How do we formulate thoughts? How do we store information? And then the third school is called constructivism. And this is very different again. What the experts here and the thought leaders at the time looked at is that the learners are active. Learners are seen as being active and learning is seen as an active process. So the learners are no longer a spectator just sitting back in class looking at the teacher or sitting back and absorbing information. Instead, the learner and the learning has moved on to an active participation. And I deliberately had this guy playing table tennis because you can't passively play table tennis. You're either playing table tennis or you're not. So constructivists sees learners as being active in their own learning. What they really see as well is in terms of adult learnings. So you guys, everyone here today in this session are adults. You're here by choice. You're here because Tom is an amazing host and he's put on a wonderful conference over 3 days, but you're also here because you want to learn things. And you all have a different learned experience. You all come to here with a different experience and different stuff. So what constructivists looked at is you're building constantly on previous knowledge to create your own learning. And they see us as being problem solvers. So I'll show you something in a few minutes about principles. And one of you will go, oh, that's like the thing I learned 6 months ago. But that will be different for each of you. And then you construct your existing knowledge with the new knowledge to construct newer knowledge. So they see us as being problem solvers. And that's why I have Sherlock Holmes. He was a great problem solver. So there are the three things. And this, as I said, is deliberately overly simplified. as I said at the outset, you could spend years reading the amount of vast knowledge and vast literature about all of these fields. And to really push home the overly simplified version is that behaviorism can be seen as what, cognitivism can be seen as how, and constructivism can be seen as why. So what are we learning? Cognitive is how do we learn? And constructivism, then why am I learning this? And how is this adding into my prior knowledge? And the bonus reason I mentioned these pedagogical schools, well, there's a couple of main reasons. One is you now know what some of them are. If you're ever talking to someone and they mention these three words, you now know what they mean. And then the last reason is that in the world that I'm going to bring you in, which is good learning design and how to design better learning for people to understand it, which of the three schools do you think that fits into the best? So if you're thinking about designing visual learning content, which of the three schools do you think that fits into mainly? Behaviorism, cognitivism, or constructivism? And just pop it in the chat. So which of the three? I'll give that about 30 seconds or so. I am conscious there's a slight delay in this. Yeah, correct. All of the above. Yeah, a mix, it can be. Daniel, I love that. Bonus points for Daniel. Lego, everything is awesome. Yeah, a mixture. It is a mixture because they all tie in and they all relate and they all influence learning design. Kira, yeah, you can see for all three, but I guess the one that it would fit into kind of mainly would be cognitivism. And I'll explain why, and then we move on nicely to the next part. So when we design visual learning and visual learning good design, we're trying to get stuff from the sensory store to the short-term memory into long-term memory. So they all have a part to play, but cognitivism would be primarily focused on how we get information into our memory. Okay. So what we're going to move on to next is actually a little bit of look at data, and then I'll share a little story with you, and then I'll bring you through the principles. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. So good learning design in any field you're in, science, engineering, industry, anything at all, it actually doesn't matter. Any sector, any industry you're in anything we do literally in life nowadays, what's really, really, really important is data. Data is important. Data is key. So if you ever want to do something new or design something new or implement something different, we always have to have data as a starting point. Data to back up what we're trying to do, or data as a guideline. So what I'm going to share on the screen now is 4 pretty well-known data points. And I'm going to ask you in the chat to let me know what you think. So 100 degrees Celsius. The second one is 121.1 degrees Celsius. The third is then a speed, and then the final one is a time. But if we go back to the first one, 100 degrees Celsius, what do you think that might relate to? What's that a data point of? I give that a second there. So 100 degrees Celsius, what do you think that might be? Excellent. If at 100%, boiling water, that's 100% correct. Mike Taylor is hot on the presses there. Yeah, 100 degrees Celsius. The second one then, guys, 121.1 degrees Celsius. What do you think that might be? This is a little bit trickier, so I'll actually give you the answer to that one. Hot water, excellent stuff. The second one, 121.1 degrees Celsius, is I've previously worked in pharmaceutical industry, and that's this point of sterilization. Oh, Sarah is on the button. The condensation point for steam, 100%. So to put that in context, is that would be if any of you guys have babies and you sterilize the bottles at home, that will be the point of that. So the reason I bring this up is 100 degrees Celsius is the boiling point of water. So if you wanted to design a new kettle to boil water, well, then at minimum, the kettle has to get to 100 degrees Celsius. If it doesn't, it's not a kettle. So data influences everything we do. The third one, 120 kilometers per hour. What do you think that might be? I live in Ireland, and that's a speed. What do you think that might be? So again, for the 121.1, if you want to design a new machine to sterilize babies' bottles, you'd have to make sure that the machine gets to 121.1 degrees Celsius. So guys, just the 120 kilometers per hour, what do you think that might be? Okay, excellent. Jose, you're 100% right. That's the same in Ireland. So it's a speed limit. Yeah. So in Ireland, the speed limit is 120 kilometers per hour on motorways. So again, the idea of data here is if you want to design a new motorway, or if you want to raise a speed limit, you have to have data to justify whatever it is you do. And then the last one is a time, 2 hours, 1 minute and 9 seconds. What do you think that might be? Daniel McKevitt, spot on the money. Yeah, speed limit in the Emerald Isle. So the last one, 2 hours, 1 minute and 9 seconds. What do you think that might be? And I'll give that another 10 seconds before we move on. Daniel McKevitt is on fire. Yes, Daniel, you're correct. It's the marathon record. I like to run. That's what I do. And Eliud Kipchoge is a runner. He's the world record holder at the marathon. So if I decide I want to break the world marathon record, I have to get faster than 2 hours, 1 minute and 9 seconds. Sarah, the average time to log into account, probably right. But that's how long it takes Eliud Kipchoge to run a marathon. So if I ever want to run a marathon, as I said, I have to run faster than that. So that's never going to happen. But you get my point here about data being so important. So data is so important in everything we do in life. It's everywhere. So now I'm going to share with you a little scenario or a story that hopefully you might recognize. And it's not 100% a true story, but it's kind of based on a true story. And we'll call the story The Request. So all of you guys are in learning, you're in learning design, you're learning designers, you're interested in the world of learning design. So you either deal with clients or you deal with teams where you work, where you're designing learning. That's what you guys do. So the request comes in for you from somebody that you're working with to say, we have something new. So just take you're in a big organization. And imagine there's a new compliance training coming in and everybody in the company has to do this compliance training. Okay, so this is the story, the request. So then someone says to you, will you put together some slides on something? Will you create a course on this compliance thing? And they say it's really important that everybody needs to know this. So you go away and you come back and you design this. And this is your first draft. This is some info that's important to you to know. Now, I know it's not great, but that's not the point. It's just to illustrate that this is really important that you need to know. So you bring that back, and then they come back with, how about a green background? So you say, okay. And then you do a green background. So this is some information that's important for you to know. And now it's on a green background. And then they say to you, how about red text? And you say, okay. And now you do the same thing with red text. And then they say, how about italics? And you go, okay. And then you put it in italics. And then they say, oh, actually, can you highlight it and put it in a box? So then you get the red text and you put it for some random reason in a blue box. And then they say to you, can you move the box to one side? And you say, okay. So now you have the box on one side. And then they say animation, we got to have the box spinning in. I love spinning. So now you have the box spinning in with the important information in the box. And then they say, oh, we need an arrow to point at information. Now, I know this is like a story, but just go with me. So now it's coming in and you have an arrow, and then they come back and they say, obviously, I meant 2 arrows. One looks weird. So now you have a spinning box and you have not 1, but 2 arrows. And then they say, oh, we want to have a picture of someone taking notes because we want the learners to take notes because this is really important stuff. So now you have a spinning box, you have 2 arrows, and you have a really terrible picture of someone taking notes. And then they say, oh, now we need a voiceover. Now, I don't know, are you going to hear this because there's a problem with the audio? So if you didn't hear, that's me really annoyed saying this is important information for you to know. And then they finally say, what about the video? And you say, okay, now the spinning box, you do 2 arrows, a picture of someone taking notes, and you have a video. So again, I'm not sure if you heard that, but that's me on the beach saying this is important information for you to know. So thanks for coming on that little story with me, and I hope it resonates with some of you, and I hope that's what you can understand, because that happens quite a lot. And what generally happens at this point in your head, you are screaming, stop. Can we just please stop? That's enough. And the reason you want it all to stop is because that is somebody's opinion. The person you were designing the training for, the person you were designing the content for, had an opinion. They might have been somewhere, they saw a green background, they liked it. They like a spinning box, they like to write text. They don't know why they like it, but it's just simply their opinion. And then that leads me nicely on to, if only we had some data for learning design. So I've just outlined a few minutes ago how important data is for everything we do in life. And I gave you 4 quite simple examples. If you want to change something, you have to have data to back it up, to propose anything you want to do differently or anything new you want to do. And data can be a framework and a guideline. So if only we had some data, and thankfully we do. That would be a terrible cliffhanger, by the way, if I just said, thanks for coming, end of the show, we have no data. But thankfully we do. And who can we thank are Richard E. Mayer, who not many of you knew, that's okay. And secondly, Ruth Calvin Clark. So Richard E. Mayer, at this poll at the start, some people had heard of him, some people didn't. I'm a major fan of his work. I've been a fan of his work for a long time. He's amazing at what he does. So a little background about him. He's a PhD in psychology. He's a professor of psychology since 1977. And the next part, if you look at that, he was the ranked and most productive psychologist globally in education psychology in that decade. So in that decade, he was the most productive. He's the author of more than 500 publications and over 30 books. I've seen a lot of interviews he's given. I've seen a lot of conferences he's presented at, and he comes across as a really friendly, affable guy. He just loves what he does, which is figuring out how do we learn and how best to help people learn. So for this particular book and the principles I'm going to share with you, he co-authored with Ruth Calvin Clark, and she has a PhD in education psychology, and her expertise is she's bridging the gap between academia and practitioner application. And she's the founder of Clark Training and Consulting. And the reason their work is so popular, and the reason I'm such a big fan of their work, and the reason I use their work all the time, is because it's evidence-based research. It is not an opinion. It's not Richard saying, I like the color green and a red box, or Ruth saying, how about we do it in red italics? It's not that. They did evidence-based research. So they tested things out. Their 2 most famous books, Richard E. Mayer's originally is Multimedia Learning, and then the co-authored book is E-Learning and Science of Instruction, which I have here. So you can go and get this book. It's quite dense, it's quite heavy, there's quite lots of stats, and there's quite lots of stuff in it. So go and get it if you wish. But thankfully and lucky for you guys today, you don't have to. What I've done is I've distilled each of the principles down, and I'm now going to bring you through each of the 12 principles. Oh, and that's a kind of a spoiler. There's 12. There's 12 principles. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to bring you through the 12 principles. Is everybody still with me? Is everybody just over the moon excited about these 12 principles? Okay, let's take a closer look. Number 1, multimedia. Now, what you'll see is the common use of language, and just pointed out to you at the very start, is you'll see something and then, THAN. So we learn better and than. So in most of the scenarios, in most of the principles, they're comparing one option versus another option. So we learn better from X than from Y. So that's just to preface that at the start. So multimedia. So what does this mean? Okay, so look at this. This is a well-written thing. I've written hundreds, if not thousands, of standard operating procedures, work instructions, how-to guides. And a key thing in any of these is the first word should be an active verb. And this mostly is. So loosen the tire, position the tire iron, grasp the wrench, loosen the wheel nuts. What their evidence-based research found for good multimedia and good visual learning design is this: it's better to have words and pictures than from words alone. So this one on the right is the exact same words. The words are exactly the same. Do you see that? Position, grasp, loosen. But now they've included an image. So in this one on the left, your mind is trying to imagine where the 9 o'clock is. Imagine where the wrench is. Imagine loosening the nuts. Over here, you don't have to imagine. You can just see it. So the instructions, the steps, the active verb is still the same, but now you have the addition of a picture. And my favorite part of all is they've added in righty-tighty and lefty-loosey, because that's all we ever need to know. But this, they found, is much better for the learner. They can see it, and they don't have to then use their cognition, their brain, in imagining it. So that's number one, multimedia. Number two, coherence. And just to point out, I'll go through the principles and then we can take a Q&A at the end. So coherence, we learn better when extraneous words, pictures, and sounds are excluded rather than included. So here's just some stuff we say from pharmaceuticals. Right. So a lot of this thing here is design fluff. It's stuff that maybe I saw this type of thing and I liked how this looked and I wanted to put this picture in, and I have a random picture of a microscope here, and then I threw in a schematic because someone told me that the schematic was really important. But what's actually happening here is that you, the learner, are trying to figure out what's the important stuff here. So what they found was coherence is basically less is more. So edit, cut, remove, reduce. The key thing here is less is more. What is the most important information to include in order to transfer the key learning and the key message to the learner? It's all about reducing the cognitive load on the learner. Make it as easy as possible for the learner to learn. So some of the stuff might have looked nice and it might aesthetically be pleasing. Well, these actually kind of aren't. But you could see maybe someone likes this picture, it looks great. But the really important thing is here's the important content. So remove the fluff, remove the extraneous words. That's coherence. Number two. Number three and four both use the word contiguity. So say it with me, contiguity. So we've had funny G's today. We've had pedagogy, and now we've contiguity. Contiguity means closeness or proximity. So this is spatial contiguity. We learn better when corresponding words and pictures are presented near rather than far from each other. Okay, so in relation to space. So this is from a some kind of manual, something to do with a piston pump, and it's very well written. It's perfectly well done. You have this image on the top, and then at the end you have your little table with your like icons. So what's happening in your mind is you're looking up to see A, and then you're looking down to see on the table where A is the handle. You look back up to see F, and you're storing F in your brain and looking down to see hose. Now imagine if they were further apart, you'd be storing it longer. So you're actually actively storing that word in your short-term memory while you're looking down. And that ties in again completely with one of the guys I said at the start, George Miller, about Miller's Law. So you're actually putting information and storing it in your short-term memory. So what he found was that was fine, or what they found, Richard E. Grant and Ruth Colvin Clark, was that's fine, but this is better. Now there's no table. They are not storing anything in your short-term memory. It's just there. The learner can just see it. They can read it. They're not having to store anything temporarily in their short-term. It's like having a cache on your computer. You're not storing anything there. It's just there. You just read it. So again, for the learner, they're just literally looking at it and reading it, and then they're understanding it because it's there. They don't have to remember anything. And that's spatial. So you reduce the space. The things are not. So the corresponding words and pictures are next to each other, not far away. Number four. So we're a quarter of the way there. Hope everybody's having an awesome time, as I said about Lego Emmett. So the second one is temporal contiguity. This is to do with time. So the first one was space, and this is time. So we've space and time. We learn better when corresponding words and pictures are presented simultaneously rather than successively. Okay, what does this mean, Emmett? So take you're reading a book about Ireland and the population growth in Ireland, and this was on page 4 of a report, or page 4 of a slide deck, or it's on page 4 of an e-learning course you're taking, and you're clicking through, you know, move next page, next page, next page. So this is on page 4, and it says population since 1960, we've gone from 2.8 to 4.8 million in 2016, and it's increased steadily over time, and that's on page 4. Now imagine on page 24, if you saw this, you're now trying to remember back to 20 pages previously because there's been a time delay and a time difference. You're trying to think back of what was said on the previous page. So what's better to do is have it together. Now there's no time delay. And to even design it better, you'd probably just put maybe text boxes on the graph or on the chart here and put it here. But In essence, with the temporal contiguity, you're removing time. You're allowing people to see them presented simultaneously rather than in a time lag. So the key for the two contiguities is don't mess with space or time. Now, you can get in a DeLorean with Dr. Emmett Brown and go back and go above 88 miles per hour if you wish, but that's completely up to you. So that's the two contiguities. Don't mess with space or time. Redundancy. Redundancy states we learn better from visuals and narration than from visuals, narration, and on-screen text. Now, this is slightly different. It's comparing two things with three. Visuals and narration, or visuals, narrations, and on-screen text. And I'm aware the audio won't work again here. So in this, this is me narrating how to open a new file. So obviously I can hear it, and I'll just call out what it is. So I'm saying to start a new. So I'm basically narrating and the same words are appearing at the end of the screen. So I'm narrating it and the same words are appearing at the end of the screen. What they found was if you had a choice, if you have a visuals and a narration, or the visuals, narration, and the on-screen text, it's best to remove the text. Now, obviously, for universal design for learning and accessibility reasons, what we would always advise is that you give people the option of turning on closed captions, or even for people learning and maybe they're on a commute and they don't want everyone to hear the audio, they just want to read the thing. You give people the option. But what they found from the research was that what actually happens if you're listening to the narration and you're reading at the same time, you're causing a clash internally. So that's why it's called redundancy. You're making it redundant. So you want to reduce, or you want to cut out one and the one you cut out. Again, as I said, give people the option, give people the choice, allow them to turn on captions, allow them to read the thing. But if you have a choice, if you have narration and audio, that's better for people. You've then removed the clash. If you have to listen to me say it and read it at the same time, you're causing a clash. So that's redundancy. Number 6, pre-training. We learn better when we know the names and characteristics of the main concept. So again, the examples I have here are from pharmaceutical world. So that's a glass vial, that's a stopper, that's a cap, that's a finished vial. What we really mean here is I've been in lots of different industries, and I'm sure a lot of you have, and lots of people talk in acronyms constantly talking acronyms and constantly talking 3-letter acronyms. And you could go to meetings where there's no actual English spoken. It's just constantly 3-letter acronyms over and over and over again. Imagine you're learning and your first 2 or 3 days or your first week in a job, and you're doing a training course and everyone is talking these acronyms and you have no idea what they're talking about. You're not even there. You've opted out because you don't understand anything they're talking about. So a pre-training states is if we know the names or the characteristics in advance. And a simple way of doing that for e-learning design or for anything is you have a glossary of terms. So either it could be e-learning design and they click on a button and they can see all the names, or if you're doing like an instructor-led course, you can hand them out the glossary in advance. So at least they know going what those words are, and then they can focus on actually learning and not be worried about what is he talking about. And then they can get engaged in more higher order thinking and more higher order learning than just wondering what is this word he's talking about. That is pre-training. We're halfway there. I can feel the excitement. It's fantastic. So number 7 is modality. So modality states it's like redundancy, but slightly different. Redundancy was 2 versus 3. This is 2 versus 2. See, we learn then visuals and narration, then visuals and on-screen text. So similar to last one, the other one was cutting one out. This is if you have a choice. Now, I've mentioned accessibility and I've mentioned universal design for learning. We should always give people an option to turn on closed captions in order to read what's on the screen. But from a learning point of view, if you're looking at something of how to do something and someone's narrating, that's easier to absorb than if you're looking at something and trying to read steps at the same time, because now your eyes are trying to look at a visual and read the steps connected with that thing at the same time. So modality refers to the mode. So it's better to have the audio narration, again, based on the idea that you're using a visual channel to do one visual thing at a time, which is look at the visual. So visual and audio narration is better than visual and written text. You're allowing your visual system just to look at one visual thing at a time. Number 8, signaling. We learn better when cues that highlight the essential material are added. So here's just a piece of lorem ipsum text, and you're looking at this, you the learner are looking at this going, okay, this is all fine, this is fantastic, I love it, but what's the important part? So you highlight the important part. That's basically signaling. You highlight the important part. Think back to any of your mathematic books or your history books where they'd call out key dates or key formulas. They were always highlighted because the rest of the stuff is important, but most important is this. That's signaling. To make it very obvious to the learner what is the really important thing. Segmenting. We learn better when we control the pace of the presentation rather than as a continuous unit. We're adults, we're learners, we're doing learning content, we're absorbing learning. We want to be able to control the pace of our presentation. The second part of this, again, is a video which won't play properly because the audio isn't working, being transmitted properly. But what this basically means is, I'm not sure about you guys, but I've often had to do an e-learning module. And the designer decided that it had to be locked down to be 1 hour. So we go back to a compliance-based training. So it's locked down, it has to be 1 hour. So you have to get through so much in 1 hour, and then in the hour you take a quiz. So that sounds great because the people running the metrics can say we had 5,000 people or 1,000 people or 500 people spend 1 hour each on this training. What happened in practice was people would start it, go for lunch, come back, take the quiz. They're not even doing it. People need to be able to control the pace. You always have to acknowledge the fact that some people know a lot about chapter 1 and maybe nothing about chapter 2. So they might only skip through chapter 1, but they want to go through chapter 2 in more detail because they know some stuff, because they're active learners, they're constructive as learners, they know other things. So again, in terms of learning design, if you're going to have like one video of 20 minutes long or 10 at 2, go for the 10 at 2. Break it down, make it smaller. And then people can control the pace at which they go through it. So again, this video is just an example of me showing that I can control the pace of this video, and I can go over to find. So this example is I just want to find how to connect the right microphone to this conferencing software. If I couldn't scroll over and back, that would drive you crazy. And it's the same thing. If you go onto YouTube to figure out how to do something and you see a video comes back for 30 minutes, 8 minutes, or 3 minutes, which one are you going to watch first? The 3-minute one. Because you think if it's no good, I've only lost 3 minutes. But if it's 30 minutes, I've lost 30 minutes of my life. So allow people to control the pace rather than as a continuous unit. That's really important. Number 10, with 3 to go, just 3 to go. We're almost there, and then we can have a few minute Q&A. We don't necessarily learn better from a multimedia lesson when the speaker's image is added to the screen. Now, this isn't synchronous. This is not referring to synchronous learning like this. I'm in a class with you. I'm on an event platform with you now, or you're on a Zoom where you want to see the people. This is not this. This is you log onto your LMS or you log onto your VLE and you're taking a piece of self-directed learning. And is it better to have the presenter's face on the screen? Yes or no? What they found from the research, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter at all. So this is about asynchronous learning. You, the learner, log onto a system, you go through some content. What they found was it doesn't really matter. What I'm seeing now is being the best, and I'll give you 2 examples. I did a master's a number of years ago, fully online. And one lecture, we never turned on the screen for the whole year. So we never knew what they looked like, which was a bit weird. Then the other person was very handsy. So constantly doing this constantly all the time. And that was quite distracting then in the top corner of the screen because you want to focus on the thing. So what they found is really kind of doesn't matter. What's becoming good practice now in a lot of asynchronous learning is you might have, say, 10 chapters and there's maybe 10 pieces of content you're going through. But generally what happens is the very first piece might be like a 30-second intro video from the presenter or from the author or from the creator or the speaker saying, hi, I'm Emmett, I'm a real person. I'm going to bring you through this course and you're going to, I'm going to be talking through this course for the next number of while. And then they go. And then you, the learner, can focus on learning the thing you want to learn and not become distracted by the person doing this stuff on the top corner of the screen. So they don't necessarily learn better from a multimedia lesson when the speaker's image is added to the screen. That's number 10. 2 more to go. And this one is tricky because, again, you're not hearing the audio. But we learn better when the narration is spoken in a friendly human voice rather than a machine voice. So the audio was going to go like something like this. Which is, we learn better when the narration is spoken in a friendly voice rather than a machine voice. So the key point of this is no to robotic voiceovers. Now, I'm very well aware that the voiceover technology is becoming increasingly better every day. And there's like lots of AI speech, lots of systems that are becoming incredibly sophisticated. But the reason they're becoming sophisticated is they no longer sound like robots, they sound like humans. So we learn better when the narration is spoken in a friendly human voice. So if you're designing something, and if you're designing a narration or doing a narration, if you hire an external person, fantastic. If you have to get one of these AI voice generators, great, because they're coming better. But the key second part of that is it's a friendly human voice. So if you are recording it yourself, just have a friendly human voice. Nobody wants to hear you being angry or having a bad day, because then they'll tune out. So always think of as you're talking to your friend. And how I always explain to people how to do that is, if your friend just say, Emmett, can you show me how to do that thing? And you say, no problem, this is how you do that thing. So we as humans, even though we're logging onto a computer to do asynchronous at our own time, at our own pace, learning content, we prefer and we connect better with someone who sounds friendly and is a human. That's voice. And the last one, personalization. This refers to the written word. So the voice referred to the audio, spoken, narrated word. This one refers to the written word. And what they found was we learn better when words are in a conversational tone or style rather than a formal style. And that kind of makes sense because it ties in exactly with the friendly voice thing. And how you so this piece of text here is well written. It's talking about multimedia learning occurs when the learner builds a mental representation for purpose of a research program. Their pictures are intended to foster learning. They can be graphics, or they can construct a mental representation of a lightning system, blah, 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 blah. Very well written. But it kind of sounds formal, quite dry, and it's not very conversational. We learn better when words are in a conversational style rather than a formal style. And to put this in practice, if you only remember one thing and you remember all these 12 principles today, you always know if you're using the correct personalization and the correct conversational tone, if your written word includes the word you a lot, Y-O-U. So if you say stuff like, today you will learn how to do this, you will see how to do this, you will be shown how to do this, you will see the steps, you will learn about. Because if you're saying you, that means you're conversing to a person. And then the learner who is reading it is thinking, oh, they're talking to me. I'm going to learn this. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to have this knowledge. I'm going to be able to do this by the end of this training. So to get through all the theory, if you are saying the word you a lot, that means you're correctly writing in a nice, friendly, conversational style. And that is the 12. So that is a 12. I have a few more slides to go through, and then we can get to a Q&A. And if I have a minute at the end, I can show you a little bonus. But the summary and the next steps are this, just to be clear. This is a framework. They even say it's a framework. It's a proven guidelines. There are guidelines. So think of them as a framework. I'm not expecting you. So to start off with these, what I always recommend to people do is look at other training. And this kind of comes back to something I didn't actually say at the start. Oftentimes when you're going through, everyone here is in the world of learning and learning design. And often you're going through stuff as a learner and you're thinking, I don't really like that, but you don't know why you don't like that. It's just in your gut. It's like, I don't like how that's laid out or designed. And you're not quite sure why. So this tells you why. This is kind of answering that feeling in your gut as to why you don't really like it. But there are guidelines. So my proposal is, and my suggestion is, and recommendation always is, go back and look at something and evaluate it based on the 12 principles. And just go, yeah, that had that, that had that, that had that. And then you could see if it has more of them, or that's why it's good, because it was in conversational tone, or because they had redundancy, it's because they had clear visuals, it was because the stuff was together, Okay, that all makes sense now. I'm not proposing, and that's not how it's supposed to be. Some people say, Emmett, do I have to have all 12? And when I'm designing something new, I have to abide by the 12? No, because sometimes it doesn't. If you're designing a small video, that can't have all of the 12 things, but maybe it has 2 or 3 that relate. But use them as a checklist. So how I use them, I just have a little checklist. And if you wish, I can share, I have just a simple, shortened kind of checklist done up for myself. So I have a checklist. I can share the document with you. But there, at no point is anybody suggesting you have to have all of these 12 in order for the training to be good. No, it's a framework, it's a guideline, but it's based on evidence-based learning. It's based on research. It's based on proper evidence-based. So kind of to finish up, or almost finished up, it's a lot of what they looked at is based on this idea, this thing called dual coding. Some of you probably have heard of it before, and if you have, fantastic, and if you haven't, that's also fantastic. Dual coding is the concept that we have 2 channels to encode information. So remember at the start I said we were looking at cognitivism, so all they really wanted to know was how does stuff get into our memory, how does it get into from our sensory store, into our short-term memory, into our long-term memory, how does that happen? It's by dual coding. So they either come in via the visual, the non-verbal processing through our eyes, or they come in through the verbal processing. So I'll give an example of what that means. Say there's a song you haven't heard in ages. So say 10 years ago, you were at some concert somewhere and it was a sunny day and it was fantastic and you were with your friends and it was an amazing gig and the atmosphere was fantastic and this band played this song, or you were somewhere and this song was played and you just had a wonderful time. You haven't heard it for 10 years and now you hear it on the radio today. The minute you hear it on the radio, you're back to that memory of where you were, because it's encoded twice. It's encoded visually and encoded via your thing. And that's also why I used to always get in trouble when I was supposed to be studying for exams, and I'd study and I'd have music playing and my parents would say, turn off the music, and you can't concentrate. That's actually wrong. You can, because it's a different system. I'm looking at the books and I'm listening to music. Now what you can't do is you can't study books and watch TV at the same time. You can't do that really, because it's the one channel. So dual coding is so important, and that's often happens. You hear something and you're immediately transported back to where you had been when you last heard that song. So the dual coding, what it does is it multiplies it. They're linked, and what they've shown is because they're linked, the linked memories make retrieval easier. So it's encoded twice into your long-term memory. So it's gone from your stimulus into your long-term memory. So what that's really saying is words and related images can improve learning, and it's all about helping us go from our short-term, our sensory store, to our short-term memory, to our long-term memory. So to find out more, just Google Richard E. Mayer. As I said, I'm a big fan. He's a very affable guy. He just loves learning. He loves designing learning. He loves figuring out how do we learn and how best to help people learn. The whole idea of all of this really is it's to reduce the cognitive load on the learner. And to put that in simple things is we want to design stuff to make it as easy as possible for the learner to learn. So between him, Richard E. Mayer, and Ruth Colvin Clark, as I said, their most famous book is E-Learning and the Science of Instruction. So look, feel free, go get the books, take a read, or not, because I've now shown you each of the principles in clear, tangible way. So I'm hoping that from today you can go, okay, I get where the principles are coming from, and now you might put them into practice. So the key takeaways for today from this 45 minutes or 50 minutes of a talk is that the key takeaways to help you design better learning. So you can see what I've done there, help you, conversational personalization tone, is that it's not good enough just to throw all information down on a page. That's really poor learning design. And that's often how we come to be as learning designers. I work for a lot of companies where you're dealing with extraordinarily clever engineers and designers who have developed these systems, and they have all this information that they want to share, but they just throw it all in a manual or in a book or on a slide deck. And then you're transferring the hardship onto the learner. So there's a quote I often use, and I love, I'm not 100% sure who said it, but it's hard writing makes easy reading, and easy writing makes hard reading. So let's say that one again. Hard writing makes easy reading. So for me to make something easy for the learner to read is really hard. I have to cut, I have to edit, I have to go through lots of iterations. On the other hand, I can write any old junk, and then I'm transferring the work on the learner for them to understand and figure out what it is I'm talking about. So it's harder to design something that looks simple and easy to design something that looks terrible. So it's easy to design something that looks poor. It's really hard to design something that looks simple and well put together. So the idea is the principles and these guidelines and these frameworks will help you design better learning. So the next time, if we go back to our request, so we say the request part 2, starring you. So the next time you're asked to design some digital learning content, could be next week, could be next month, could be next year, go back and use the principles. Look at them. Just remember them. Have a glance at them. And who will really thank you are your learners. And your learners will be as happy as this guy. They will be so happy. Look how happy he is. He's just so happy. That will be your learners. And for bonus points in the chat, let me know who that is. He's a famous Hollywood actor. So that will be your learners. They will be so happy that you've gone through the guidelines, you've gone through the principles, and you designed a really good piece of learning design to reduce their cognitive load and allow them just to focus on learning. So we have a few minutes for Q&A, and then we can move on to literally we're being done. And yeah, so that on the left is Emmett Brakowski, and on the right is my name, Emmett Cullinane. So with that, Tom, I'm very happy to take some questions. But first of all, I'm very happy, and I hope that some of you have had a guess as to who that actor is. Looking at the chat. Kim is on the money. Kim, I'm so impressed. Most times I put that up, I got the wrong suggestion. My favorite ever suggestion someone said to me is that Zach Galifianakis, that guy from The Hangover. And I went, what? And he actually does look a lot like Zach Galifianakis. But that, yes, Ken put in that. But that's Robert Redford from a film in the 70s called, I've forgotten the name of it now. Jeremiah Johnson. He was living a wilderness in the woods, and yeah, he doesn't look like Robert Redford, but he doesn't look like himself. But I use that GIF a lot because it generally makes people smile, because he's smiling like your learners hopefully might be. So guys, any questions for me at this point? Thank you, Pete. Everything is awesome. That's good to hear. Yeah, I suppose just for you guys, just for the few minutes we have, I actually have one little thing I want to share just at the very, very end, maybe for about 60 seconds. But before that is, were you guys aware of these principles? Had you heard of them? Had you heard of Richard E. Mayer? And if you had, do you use them? And then secondly, if you haven't heard of them, do you think you might look them up a bit more now? Some good comments there, guys. Thanks very much for that. That's great. Oh, Tom, I think you're mute.
There we go.
There you go. I could see something happening. I couldn't hear anything. I didn't know it was on my end.
It's the problem with this system. There's like 3 mute buttons in a chain, so you've kind of got to remember to check them all. So yeah, well, I think that's the one thing that kind of struck me during all that was how a lot of these things are they kind of tend to float around the L&D space. Maybe not as a set group of 12, but things like redundancy.
Yes.
I came across that long before I became aware of kind of Mayer's larger work, as it were. But I think it's quite interesting to then realize that the amount of research and time that's gone into pinning these things up because often I think when we have discussions and we thinking back to that lovely stakeholder we were dealing with in the story at the start of your presentation, I think having the kind of no, the science is on my side
Yeah.
argument really helps in that conversation, because otherwise they can very much just go, well, that's your opinion, when you
Yes.
tell them that what they're suggesting is awful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's usually people are very reluctant, and it's very hard to say that's a terrible idea because, like, it's usually a senior manager in some other department. But it's nice to have, the science, as you said, and the evidence on your side. And a lot of it, when you go through the first time, for me, is is that not kind of common sense? But it's not, because someone had to go and do the research. And you're right, I probably heard of redundancy too before I knew what it really meant. And then I became acquainted with this, and then I kind of became a fan of Richard E. Mayer. And I was like, no one I know knows about this guy, even though, like, he's unbelievable. But yeah, so the idea of this presentation, I suppose, Tom, is that it's to try and take it from this kind of abstract, heavy, dense academic work into, look, here's 12 things that can help you design learning, really. And that's, I think, what most of us are here to do, is to just have something to help us design better learning.
Absolutely. There's loads of comments here. Some people have heard of them before and have the book. Some never heard of this before. Some aware of some, but not others. I think, it's really, really positive sentiments, but perhaps no questions at the moment. In fairness, you did a very good job of covering them. So that's likely it. Well, look, I know there was something you wanted to cover. 60 seconds, you said?
Yeah, just for one final second. Yeah, so just
Go
to
for it.
kind of little bonus on that, if you can see, I'm not sharing. Here we go. Yeah, so I've been very heavy on, and obviously for good reason, on the whole idea of Richard E. Mayer and Ruth Colvin Clark and that book. But there's a bonus thing which kind of ties in, because a lot of people come from the world of communication and design and UX and communication design. And another expert in this field is called Nancy Duarte. She's an expert communication consultant, and she's written lots of books. And one of her most famous ones, and I have this one again, is called Slideology. And just one sentence that she has in it, and I love it: it's laziness on the presenter's part to put everything on one slide. And that nearly encapsulates half of what Richard E. Mayer was talking about. Lots of people just have lots of stuff. I want to communicate all of this now to the learners. But it's really lazy on the presenter's part to put everything on one slide. And it's much harder to design it coherently and in a well way that people can understand it. The double bonus is then there's 12 books. I developed this at Christmas. There's 12 books that I love from design and learning perspective that I've put together an interactive kind of website, so I can share that. People, they can just contact me in either the chat, or the best way to contact me is probably on the profile, my LinkedIn profile. So feel free to contact me in the chat hop in within this event system that Tom has set up, which is fantastic. But yeah, now we're really done. So contact me on LinkedIn or contact me in the chat, and I'll be happy to share those with you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to present and put all this together. Really insightful. So thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us once again. Our next session starts in just 15 minutes right here on the main stage. Everything for the rest of the day now is right here on the main stage. And we actually have a creative workshop coming up next with Sarah Hill about It's Not a Learning Problem, Reframing Problems to Find Solutions. So exciting stuff coming down the line. Thank you all again, and we shall see you soon.